Welcome, everyone, to the Inclusion Podcast. I'm Dr. Julie Costin.
And I'm Dr. Christy Preddy-Franzak. We're so glad you're here as we explore all things inclusion.
So whether you're a school leader, an educator, a parent, or simply passionate about inclusion, this podcast is for you.
In each episode, we go beyond the usual conversations, diving into what truly makes inclusive education work.
Together, let's make a difference, one conversation at a time. Here we go. Oh my goodness. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Inclusion Podcast. This one is a hot topic. And some of you will go, this is not a hot topic for us. Great. Don't listen to it. Honestly, it's only for people who have heard this issue. Some places don't confuse this, and so it's confusing to listen to this. So what's this? Okay. We hear all the time that families say, my school system said that my kid can't be included because they're supported by a paraprofessional in the inclusive classroom, and that means it's a more restrictive placement than a segregated classroom.
All right, Julie, you're going to have to say it one more time because there was like double negatives in there or something.
Ooh, I know.
Time.
I'll say it one more time. So we hear that parents will say, my district said
Okay.
that they can't be in an inclusive classroom because they have to be supported by a paraprofessional. And the inclusive classroom is more restrictive than a self-contained classroom because of the paraprofessional.
Okay, so I'm the kid. My IEP team has decided that I need human support.
Yes.
Part of my supplementary aid supports and services on my IEP.
Yeah.
But if I get that in the gen ed classroom, we're thereby making the gen ed classroom more restrictive than if I were in a restrictive environment.
So let's imagine that you're listening to this and you're like, never heard of this. I swear to you, just don't listen then. It's fine. Go find another podcast that will work for you better. If you've been told this, we need to help you clear it up. I want to clear this up for every administrator that has said it in the world. These are different things. These things, meaning paraprofessionals, are a supplemental aid support and service. So they fall under this whole list of supplemental aid supports and services. How restrictive an environment is how much access the kid has to general education content, curriculum, and peers. Meaning, the more inclusive the environment, the least restrictive the environment is.
Okay, so let's maybe the word inclusive access general, meaning it becomes less restrictive, it becomes more inclusive, the greater access I as a student have to the general education content, curriculum, and peers.
That's the only part of the formula that is about restrictiveness, is what Christy just said. How many minutes am I next to kids without disabilities in the general education content with access to the curriculum?
Okay? And so when people think about, but wait, I have to give them special education services, let's also remind people that the definition of special education services is to ensure access, participation, and progress in the general education curriculum, content, and peers. You might want the transcript for this episode in the show notes because these are a lot of phrases, but they're all saying the same thing, that restriction, or when Julie and I are promoting inclusive education, we're always saying we're ensuring the right of every student to access general education content, curriculum, and peers, curricular and extracurricular, participate in that, and make progress towards it. Julie, I'll say side note, you bifurcated it. You said there's these two issues. One, you're entitled to supplementary aid supports and services, which can include human supports and services like paraprofessional, and then restriction. Let's go down really quick the rabbit hole of humans aren't support, that support is a verb. We'll link to all those other episodes in the show notes, but we should probably clarify that out of the gate, just like we clarified restriction, that support is a verb, and then keep going.
So a lot of times people will say this kid can be included, but they need support. And they think support equals a human being. Nope. Support equals about 1 million things we can do to give kids access. For example, you might reduce the reading level of a bit of a text that a student is expected to read by themselves. You might highlight the directions so a student can see what the relevant stimuli is here. You might provide a to-do list so the kid knows exactly what's expected of them during this time. You might use peer support. Like all those things are support. And so when we say support, we don't mean a human. We mean all the possible things. Some kids will require adult support. But what we want you to hear and understand is paraprofessional support has no relationship to the decision about restrictiveness of environment.
Okay.
When we're looking at least restrictive environment, the only thing we're looking at is where's the place where they can get the most access to general education content, curriculum, and peers. Later, we discuss what supports are necessary to give that student the most access to general education content, curriculum, and peers, but that's not a factor in the LRE decision. And anytime kids are pulled out of general education, it is more restrictive. When the law says less restrictive is what we're looking for, or more inclusive is what we're looking for. Okay?
And Julie, before we move on to like what should teams be asking and what kind of shifts they should do and all of that good stuff, when you said, if this hasn't been an issue for you, move on to another episode. Why do people get so confused? I mean, I know you've alluded to it, but can you kind of just say it again? Like, why do some people end up in this spot where they're actually putting a kid in a more restrictive environment, thinking that they're not? Like, why are we doing the opposite?
Well, I think this answers the question, but let me know if it doesn't.
Okay.
It's being used as an excuse
Mm.
by teams to put kids in more restrictive environments. And it's being called the opposite. And so parents who may or may not know any better are like, oh, got it. My kid is going to be in a resource room. My kid is going to be in a self-contained classroom. My kid is going to be in a special ed classroom because that's the least restrictive environment for them. Because if they're in a general ed classroom with the para, that's very restrictive. No. That para conversation needs to be separate from. It doesn't have anything to do with the environment. The goal is to put kids in the most inclusive environments possible. And this is being used to exclude kids with the wrong reasoning behind it.
And I think what you're alluding to is this like getting settings mixed up with what is special education versus how we deliver less intrusive supports.
Yeah. So just like in general, we start in general education. It's the default, it's the foundation, and then we add supports to make it work. Settings and supports are very different. We never remove a student because they need support. We just bring the support to them. And so people have confused the fact that sometimes paraprofessionals can be considered, if they're not trained well, the support itself can feel restrictive to the student. And what we have to do instead is to train the paraprofessional, teach the paraprofessional to utilize the least restrictive techniques when they're providing supports.
Yeah, so even a kid who needs a lot of different types of supports, which could include humans,
Yeah.
we know one, supports and services are almost universally portable,
Yes.
which means they can be brought to the student. So even if supports and services are currently delivered at a particular building in my district, and it's hard for the district to bring those to where I am as a student, that's a different issue. That's just a logistical challenge the district has, but it doesn't make the gen ed classroom more restrictive because you're
Correct.
bringing in lots of supports and services, even if they're human,
That's right.
delivering those.
That's right.
When I don't have access, participation, and the ability to make progress with general education, content, curriculum, and peers, that makes something restrictive or not. So what do we what do we do? What do we ask at an IEP team meeting? What does a parent say as they advocate for inclusive education? Where do we shift our mindset? What's going on here?
Yeah, so a really simple thing to say is separate those things in your mind. The difference between supports and placement. The placement decision is how do we give this student the most access to general education content, curriculum, and peers. And Christy and I would argue it's most of the time the general education classroom. Then the second aspect is what kinds of supports will allow this kid to be as independent as possible. And sometimes that takes maybe a paraprofessional, and that paraprofessional should be trained in independence or interdependence as opposed to velcroing themselves to a student and following them around all day. We can help paras become less intrusive or more intrusive, but they're not about restriction. They're about intrusive supports or not. And we can teach that to help kids be more independent. So essentially, we've got to really, and I'm going to just call out the state of New York. I've got to say it. New York is famous for telling families, nope, this is a more or less restrictive environment because of a paraprofessional. And to say, you've got it wrong. We've got to change the legal thinking about this. And we cannot convince families to put kids into more restrictive environments just because the kid needs some adult
Or
support.
supports.
Yep.
And Julie, as we were prepping for this episode,
Yeah.
you had these 3 shifts in language. I think they're worth reading or
Yeah.
stating succinctly. Again, people can get the transcript for this episode. There's actually a handout that we'll talk about here in a minute of what you can also get for this episode at inclusiveschooling.com/download 64. But before we do that, I think that these 3 sentences helped me. And so let's just read them.
Okay. The first language change is we don't place students with paras. We support students with paras.
Oh, that one is like, that's even for me,
Mm-hmm.
a really important one. So if people didn't hear it, let's say it one more time and then make sure you get the transcript, because I think saying this at an IEP meeting or an ARD or in the hallway or anytime,
Yeah.
this is going to be important. We don't place students with paras or paras with students, right?
Yep. That's not a
Say,
placement
we
decision.
don't have enough paras to place with that student.
Mm-hmm.
We support students with paras because paras are going to offer the verbs. They're going to do the offering of choices, the increasing of access points, da 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 da. Okay.
That's right. Okay. The second big shift in language is we don't say they can't be included because they need help. We say they can be included with help.
Oh, I like that one too.
I do too. And then the last one is inclusion isn't about who is in the room in terms of adults. It's about the support we bring into the room. And so, again, it's just really separating the placement discussion with the supplemental aid supports discussion. And the goal for least restrictive environment is that all kids have the maximum access to students without disabilities, content, and curriculum of general education. And so that's the goal. So remember, a para is a supplemental aid and service, not an environment. And when we get this right, we give students what they legally deserve, which is access, belonging, and the right to learn alongside their peers with the support they need to shine. So, Christy,
Julie, let's tell them a little bit about what the download will give them. It's just like a preview so that those who need it know that they didn't have to madly commit all of this to their memory or even just rely on the transcript, but that the handout for episode 64 at inclusiveschooling.com/download 64 has some really important pieces and parts for them, as well as hyperlinks to other resources and supports.
Yeah, so I just have to say that on Facebook recently, I just addressed this, and I was explaining what least restrictive environment meant, and I was using IDEA's definition, right? But somebody wrote, "I don't agree." And I was just like, "Oh, well, then go back and read IDEA's definition of least restrictive environment."
And
So
I'll put a link in the show notes to IDEA,
yeah,
which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004, which hopefully continues to be there at the time you all are listening to this.
That's right. So the handout is called A Paraprofessional is Not an Environment. And we have information about what is least restrictive environment. We have information about what are supplemental aid supports and services. We have misunderstandings and inclusive truths. So we've got this nice column side by side. And then the para's role as a supplemental aid and service. We even have IDEA's definition of a supplemental aid and service. And then we have a whole section on what should teams be asking in order to make these decisions and in order to give kids access to the actual least restrictive environment?
So I think that the last part of the handout is probably my favorite, Julian. We can use that as we begin to wrap up the episode. But the handout has this moment where you can just say, what do I do in the moment? So when someone says, this student can't be in general education because they have a para, then you go, okay, I'm going to say to the team or the person, hey, let's pause for a second. Are we confusing support with a setting?
Mhm.
Because support is how we make inclusion possible, not how we restrict it. And they might think you're speaking a different language, just like maybe you felt at the start of this episode, and say, well, let's listen to this episode together, or let's take this handout and explore what is the difference between a support and a setting? What's the difference between paras offering support as a verb versus we're limiting access, participation, progress, which is actually the restriction?
Yeah. Yeah. So we hope this hasn't confused you more. We're trying to make this as simple as possible. But I'll just say if someone tells you that a paraprofessional is an environment or it's a factor in deciding least restrictive environment, they are not legally correct. And there is much more to the conversation that needs to happen before you move a kid to a self contained or resource room because they need a paraprofessional. Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe and catch up on past episodes where we share valuable insights, straight talk, and practical steps to challenge outdated special education practices. You can find every episode with the show notes at inclusiveschooling.com/inclusion-podcast to build more inclusive schools together.